Hello, everybody, and welcome to this webinar. I don't see any faces on the screen, and that's okay, but if someone can come off mute quickly and let me know if you can hear me, that would be great.
Hello.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Hello. Perfect.
Hi.
Lovely. I appreciate that. So my name is James Coburn. I am a partner with AIM. You may have heard me do a few presentations previously, because this is our third one with AIM Technologies here in the UK, giving coverage for many markets. I also present with AIM Sports in the US as well, and do a lot of sort of useful videos. Well, I'm told they're useful videos on YouTube for folks talking about AIM. I actually don't work for AIM, more of an independent sort of partner. And so more than anything else, it's just a great opportunity for me to be here to be able to talk to all of you on behalf of AIM as we talk about data and data analysis. Now, the first two webinars we did in our series focused on just clicking about in Race Studio 3 analysis, the new software from AIM, as relates to how to be able to analyze the data. And it's a software that continues to develop and grow, and it's something that I'm excited to use more and more when I'm at the track. So what I'm actually going to focus on today is two sort of aspects. Now, the first is we're going to have a look at sort of how we think through data analysis on the simplest possible level. And I'm going to use GPS data for the most part of today to be able to sort of make it lowest common denominator all. Now, many of you who may be saying, well, I've got more advanced channels, I've got throttle position sensors, oil pressure sensors, you name it. Is this relevant for me? There's one thing which I think is very important to note is that doesn't matter, I would argue, how advanced your system is, GPS data is relevant to all. And so that's why we're going to focus on that today. But the second thing we're going to do is we're going to use that view of data analysis, but using Race Studio 3, because one of the things I think is really important is the fact that when you look at a software and you see demonstrations, you understand how it works, it always seems to relate a little bit more, or it does to me, when it's done in context of some kind of application that we would all do. And so without further ado, the first thing I'm going to do is share my screen. Now, we have a chat box going. We have some folks on the webinar from AIM who can help answer questions. Emiliano's on here too, who is designing and is the brains behind Race Studio 3 analysis. And all the software for AIM. So if you've got questions for him as we go through, feel free to use the chat box. The other thing that I'll ask is that so that you can stay on mute so that we don't get any sort of special guests, which is always lovely to see. But at the same time, just want to make sure that it doesn't necessarily create a distraction for others. And so what I'm going to do is first and foremost, I will share my screen, and I am going to share screen number 1. First thing you're going to see is probably all of you, and then I'm going to share this and this. And so if I toggle those, could you confirm to me that you can actually see the screen, Amelia? Oh, just a thumbs up, yes, in the chat, something like that you can see the full screen?
Yeah.
Lovely. That's wonderful. Thank you very much. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk through some simple sort of basics today of data analysis. For many of you, you're probably going to think, you know what, this is pretty straightforward. For me, I'm very comfortable with this, and hopefully it does a good job of being able to just continue to walk us through Race Studio 3 analysis. For others, it might be a nice framework to be able to think about how to do the analysis of your data, because so many of us started out and continue in so many instances of using a lot of the AIM devices as a great lap timer, and if you've got a dash in your car, as a sort of an advanced set of gauges so we can see that the car's not going to explode when we're on track. But in many regards, all of these devices, from an AIM Solo 2 all the way through to the most advanced setups, all of these contain a huge treasure trove, sorry, it's the end of the day, getting a bit tongue-tied, of data that you can use to analyze. So I wanted to put that into context. We've done the introductions and housekeeping, so we can skip on from this slide. Always seem to put this in way too late in the presentation. So what we're going to cover today, basics of data analysis, and I'm going to give you 3 views that I would argue will work for 99.9% of the time when you want to be able to do some analysis of your driving. What we're not going to look at today are aspects of analysis that relate to vehicle conditions, vehicle health, aerodynamics, all those sort of aspects that this data analysis will indeed provide to you. What we're going to look at today is first and foremost using this for driver development. And we're actually going to look at ourselves, and we're going to look at our own driving today, because arguably one of the things that we always want to be able to focus on is how can we do a better job? And can we actually see that in our own data? Then we're going to figure out how to configure that in RayStudio 3 analysis. We're going to get into a live demo, how to save that user profile for analyzing that data later on. And then if we get time at the end of the presentation, we're also going to add video to the data analysis, which is a big feature as we start looking at RayStudio 3 analysis. And one of its core differentiators over RayStudio 2 analysis is that combination of data and video together. But interestingly, I'll continue to focus predominantly on GPS data, especially for those who may be even using a SmartyCam and a Solo 2 DL. So that's what we're going to cover. Now, I'm going to start with a screenshot. I'm going to start the presentation off with a few screenshots just so you can get an idea in terms of how, well, saying how my brain works is a bit of a stretch. Get an idea in terms of how I think about data analysis. And this was taught to me, a bit of a magpie sometimes. I hear and learn something and then I repeat it. So I never want to be in a position where I say this is all original thought. From the training manager for AIM in the US. His name's Roger Cadell, and he is an absolute fantastic educator in terms of how to be able to understand and work with data. And so what I want to do is use a few screenshots to be able to talk through these views, which we can then move into RayStudio 3 analysis and be able to work out how to be able to use these. And so this is the simplest view, which I find is a very effective view of being able to tell you certain pieces of information on track. And what we have is just two channels enabled. The first enabled channel we have is GPS speed, and the second is GPS longitudinal acceleration. And forgive me for how basic this is, but the reason I love GPS longitudinal acceleration is typically when the line is going down, it's slowing down, and when the line is going up, it's speeding up. And depending on the severity of those lines and how smooth they are is a good indication of how the driver is doing in terms of performance. Now we could add in latitudinal acceleration. It gives us left and right as well. But for the time being, what we're going to look at today is we're just going to use GPS longitudinal acceleration, because still to this day, after working with this data for an absolute eternity, if I want to be in a position where I'm grabbing data from a colleague of mine who has a Solo 2 or even a Solo, and I want to compare it to the fact that I may have an Evo 4S in my car, the lowest common denominator across all data comparisons that you will do using AIM devices is the fact that GPS is available to all. And so it means that it doesn't matter the setup, doesn't matter the config, it doesn't matter the equipment. If it's AIM, you can use this data to be able to analyze. So we're going to look at that. And then the last thing I've got enabled down here is a time compare bar. And so this automatically pops up in most instances when you're looking at it. Now, don't worry about some of the other stuff. I'll talk you through what these numbers mean at the top here, which I'm sure many of you may have figured out. But let's focus on how I think about this for data analysis, because this will help us as we think about using RayStudio 3 analysis. Now, this takes into account that you've already downloaded your data. You've found a place to be able to locate it, RayStudio 3 analysis. And if you're not sure about that, we'll make sure that if this is available on YouTube at a later date, there are links to the previous webinars where you can actually go and you can see how to be able to actually get your data into the system. And so no worries if you're like, well, how's he got that data in there in the first place? Don't worry, there are educational videos from AIM Shop, AIM Sports, and from someone like me on a YouTube channel. So you will not go without the opportunity of getting some of those question answers as we go forward. Now, the reason I wanted to show you this is that I want to start with the build. And in true PowerPoint style, we're going to do an animation here. Now, the reason I've started here is that this is my favorite place to be able to start when I'm thinking about what is happening. And so what I'm doing here is I'm comparing two laps. The blue lap is the fast reference line, and the red lap is the lap I'm comparing against it. And where the line is in this position above the line, it's slower, and where it's below, it's faster. And you can see that what we're looking at here is we're looking at a time delta as we go through the lap as to what's happening. Now, the reason this is happening is this is the first place that I look to be able to see where time has been gained and lost on track. Now, many of us may be quick enough in terms of our analysis to not necessarily see that by being able to see, well, this is clearly faster here than here. And so there must be some kind of, time gain or loss in so many respects there. But in what we're looking at here, we are looking at an analysis in many respects as to how to be able to compare this information. The second thing we want to be able to have a look at is we want to be able to see this in relation to what the driver's doing to be able to focus on that. But before we do that, we want to be able to see why one line is faster or slower than the other by being able to figure out, well, why has that happened? And so we go to point number 2, where we can see in many instances that what's happened is that the speed is either faster or slower at a particular point for that particular lap that is there. So you can see here that this is happening. Now, one of the things that I have noticed as we're looking through this, and many of you may have spotted this, is that we've got some slight variation in terms of faster and slower laps that's happening here in terms of reference versus something else. That's something that I know Emiliano's on. It might be a fix that we may want to be able to put in place with the device and with the Race Studio 3 software. But that being said, what we want to be able to have a look at here is why is that time distance and that delta actually happening? Why is a lap going from being faster to slower in relation to performance on track? And that's all indicative of speed. But the indication of speed is determined by what a driver is doing. And so that's what's really important. If you think about it, if I'm faster or slower at a particular point on track, that's because the driver is doing something to make the car faster or slower. It might be you've applied the brakes too soon. It might be you've taken the car too deep into a corner. You might have been braver. You might have necessarily worked through a different variable. And that's where the middle part of this conversation comes in. When we start thinking about this with GPS data, longitudinal acceleration is fantastic to be able to look at, because what we're actually seeing is when the line goes down, we can see when the car is being slowed down, and when the line goes up, we can see when the car is being sped up. And so this gives us the opportunity of being able to really start to focus on key aspects of what's happening in relation to the performance on track and what the driver is doing. And now here's the fourth view that I want you to be able to have a think about here. And so when we go into the live demo, we can think through this flow. Is we know where the car is faster or slower in relation to a point on track. And you can see that there's an interesting sort of crossover here. We know why that's happening in relation to the speed on track. And then we know what the driver's doing to be able to change it. But one of the other aspects that we want to be able to think about is where that's happening on track. And so that's the fourth point on this conversation as well, which is where is that actually happening on track as well. And that's why having this nice integrated map that we can zoom in and out of will show us where, depending on where we put our cursor, that variable is happening. So now all of a sudden, we've got the flow of thinking. And the way I think about many things is a workflow in your head that you're sitting there, you've downloaded your data, you've got a handful of seconds before you need to, in so many instances, repair something, change something, change tires or bench race with your colleagues. No matter what's happening, you've got a small window of time to be able to analyze data. So the fastest flow is to be able to think about what's happening on track in terms of time gained and lost on a lap. Why is that happening in terms of speed? What's the driver doing to be able to make that happen? And then finally, where's that happening on track? And if you piece all those aspects together, you can now start breaking down how to be able to analyze your data. And we're going to look at this live, so don't worry about necessarily looking at this variable. The second thing we want to have a look at is line. And so this is the second of the three views, which I think is universally applicable going forward. Now, this is one of the things that Race Studio 3 analysis does that used to take an absolute sort of eternity to be able to set up if you had Race Studio 2 analysis, because you would have to take the data, take the files, download them from Race Studio 2 analysis, then upload them into Google Earth, and then select the laps you wanted, and then zoom in. Whereas now it's by default created and available for you in the software. Now, this is the second thing. This is a zoom in to be able to get an idea of what sort of lines are being taken and how that's working and what's happening. And you can see in this particular instance that if you were to compare these two laps, for example, you can see that the red lap versus the blue lap is taking this very shallow here, which sort of cuts off this bit, which takes a lot of exit speed out of here. And so interestingly, we can start looking at which lines are better and comparing that with the actual performance on track. And so this is a lovely way of being able to get more of a visual reference as to where you are on track and what kind of line is being taken. So this is the second view that we want to be able to think about. Now, the third is something called a split times report. These are the three things that I personally would say, if you have these three things in your toolbox when you're at the track, chances are you're going to be able to analyze your driver performance in a matter of seconds to minutes probably, but you're not going to be there for hours working out certain variables. And so this is the third screen, which I think is hugely important, which is the the split time report. This is where you've broken the track down into different segments, and those segments that work for you, you can actually start to identify certain key aspects of what was I doing on track, what worked well, what didn't, in terms of which particular corner. Now, I've actually got 8 segments here, which I think is a little bit too many. One of the key things, as I set up a split, and I'll show you this, and we also talked about it in the last webinar, is you only want to break the track into enough segments so that you can actually remember what a segment 2 ends and begins. And so one of the things, and I've got this for illustrative purposes, you can see that what I've got here is I've got the track broken into 8 segments, and you can see those segments down here on the map, which is here. And then you can say, how fast was I through that segment? And then you can start piecing together what we all love to be able to look at, which is what was our theoretical best lap if there was no traffic and we didn't make any errors and we were nice and smooth and we were consistent with our line, because this will start to show us where we're consistent, we're not. Now, what's interesting in this particular model, and we will get into this in the live data, is you can see where there's a lot of green, with the exception of this horrendous lap here that's in dark red, there's a lot of consistency here, except for sector 2, which is in Castle Combs terms coming into a corner that they call quarry, or we call quarry. I don't know, actually us, they, whoever it is. And you can see that there's a huge amount of inconsistency in terms of performance through that lap, which if I'm looking at consistency of driver, my eye immediately graduates to, or gravitates, I should graduate. It's like my eye is going through school. It gravitates towards sector number 2, which is how do I clean up sector number 2? It just gives me an area to focus on if I want to go back to analyze that data. And so this is the third most important report we want to look at. And there's a few key things that I wanted to focus on here. The first enhanced aspect of this is that you can pick the laps you want to be able to compare. So if your split times report is giving you funny old data, get rid of your in lap, get rid of your out lap, and you'll have a far better representation of what your actual lap time would look like. And then the second thing it also provides you with, which is this fantastic view of the statistics that allow you to be able to understand what was my best rolling lap, what was my best theoretical lap, what was the worst lap I could have actually delivered on the day. In fact, lap number 8 was near as makes no difference, probably one of the worst laps I can do. I have no idea what was going on there, because it all started out pretty rosy and then it went particularly ugly thereafter. But in many respects, it gives you an idea in terms of how close are you to your best and how far are you from your worst and what the variations are there. So have a real think about this, because these are the key components. Now, there's one last screen that if you're lucky enough to be somebody who has a SmartyCam, you don't even need a SmartyCam connected to a fancy logger. As long as you've got a SmartyCam with a GPS signal, sorry, like a GPS 08 or I'm thinking GPS 09, but the folks at AIM can give you the actual part numbers to make sure I don't misrepresent, is that you can also add one last view as well, which is you can start piecing all of this together to be able to get a nice view that says, okay, so let's add it all together. And we're going to actually look at this as we go through later on in terms of this analysis. We can actually see that what we're looking at here is we're looking at where it happened. So what happened that made us really pay attention? This is sector number 1, if you remember from that training. What happened in terms of the speed? Why was the speed? What did the driver do? Remember, we're just using GPS longitudinal here. So down, slowing, up, accelerating. Where exactly did it happen on the track? And then lastly, we've also got the opportunity of being able to see exactly where that was on the actual lap, so that now we can start to piece it all together. And this is where Race Studio 3 analysis really starts to set itself apart I would argue, from Race Studio 2 analysis, which not only is it a nicer workflow, but it also adds these components in. So that's what we're going to have a look at as we go through, and that's the focus of today's conversation. So without further ado, let's get into the live demo as we go forward, and bear with me while I just switch over. So hopefully you're still seeing a quick yes in the box. We'll just make sure that if anyone wants to write in there, yes, I'm still seeing now Race Studio 3 analysis. Thank you very much, Pippa. Appreciate that. We are now in Race Studio 3 analysis. Now, if you're wondering, well, I haven't even switched Race Studio 3 analysis on yet, so all of this looks a little bit alien to me. Don't worry, it's okay. I can remember the first time I actually switched on Race Studio 2 analysis some 10 plus years ago, and I looked at it, and at that point I was like, I'm so glad this is a good lap timer, because this scares me to death and I don't think I'll ever figure it out. And so if you feel that way about any of these softwares, don't worry, we're going to work through it together, but the previous seminars will really help you get to this particular place. Now, this is live, so this is data that is live and available that we're going to work through today, and it gives us a lot of information. So these are just the files that I have. Most of them are for the last few years, of a few key ones that I've selected with the car class that I run, and I run a class called Formula Ford 1600 here in the UK. I predominantly, as you can see, I'm doing the Castle Combe Championship this year, which is not, which is why Castle Combe is dominating in terms of the tracks. But you can see I have all the information from each of the tracks that are here. Now, what we're going to do is we're actually going to log in and start looking at certain key variables. But before we do, just to give you a quick rundown as to what we actually want to be able to pay attention to on this page, is that these are all our sessions that are here, and we can see this is a data file, this is a video file from a SmartyCam, this is a data file, and if you're lucky enough to have one that merges together, you can actually link the two together. And so this is a way of being able to effectively have all of your data in one place. Similarly, as we click on these, if I click on any of these session files, and I'm going to click probably on some of these today, you've got all information about that session, the laps you did, how consistent they were. This is a great, nice feature. But here is the one that I think is without doubt one of the key variables. We all forget to take as many notes as we need to. If you're a great note taker, all credit to you. But if you're not, what they've done with, and Emiliano's did a wonderful job this, is baked in some key aspects. And my favorite thing here is this weather information. So if you're in Race Studio 3 analysis and you upload any file from a Solo 2 through to a really fancy setup, as you upload the data, the date and time will look back a good few years, I think it's 2 or 3 years at least, and we'll find the weather conditions for that particular day. Now, this is really important, I think, because some days you can be out there and your lap times don't look very good, but you look at the ambient temperature and it's in the 20s or the 30s in centigrade. And all of a sudden you can recognize that time of day and conditions are there. So this is a quick overview of this page. If you want more information about this, head over to YouTube and check out seminar number 1, or webinar number 1, I should call it, and that'll help you out with that sort of information. What we're going to do today is we're going to open up a data file to start with. And all we're going to do is a data file, and I'm going to probably, let's see if I pick this one, see what comes as we click on it and open up. Now, this is a default view that I generally tend to get with AIM. Now, I'm not sure how I set this up to start with, and it's a conversation that Emiliano will probably tell me and I will forget, and then I'll say, I don't know how I set it up. But it's just the default. I don't necessarily want to be able to see this, because today we're going to start focusing on how did I set up that view that helped me figure out how to be able to analyze the data. We're going to ignore the numbers across the top, that stay consistent, and I'll show you how to do that in just a bit. But what I want to be able to do is I want to set up the view that we were just looking at earlier on that helps me go through that, what happened time distance, what happened with the speed, what was the driver doing, and where were they doing it. So let's do that right now, and I'll walk you through how I'm doing it so you can get an idea of setting up the view that works for you. Now, that 1, 2, 3, 4 view that I set up is my preference, and it's something that I was taught, but I loved, and I continued using. Other people use different views, and that's the beauty of being in a position with a software which is customizable for how you want it. So I'm going to walk you through how I do it. but you may want to have something slightly different. And if that's the case, all good in many respects. Now, I'm also running, something called an Evo 4S, and I have, as you can probably imagine, more data than I need because I'm a bit of a junkie on this sort of stuff, and I've got loads of channels plugged in. I've got tire pressures and all sorts of other stuff, which is absolutely marvelous. But many of us don't have any of those sort of things. So we're going to focus on GPS that all of us have, and then you can add and subtract as you need to. But let's keep it in mind in terms of as we think about that flow and that workflow. So right now I've got GPS speed. I love that. I'm going to leave that. It's here in the channels. But I've also got RPMs. Now I'm lucky enough to have an RPM channel that's coming into my car, but for the purposes today, I don't want it. I have two ways of getting rid of this. I can either go up here and click on this X in the channels box, or I can just click down here and it will move RPMs from highlighted and illuminated to the left of the channels list. Now you can see that that is actually just showing me GPS speed, which is fab. That's what we want to be able to start off with. The other thing you'll also notice is it's showing me this box of different laps down here. Now, I don't use this. I'm no sort of secret that I don't use this. Other people love it. If you like it, fantastic. If you don't, there is one wonderful use for this one, which is if you have a measure that grows slowly over laps, like tire pressure, and you have that channel enabled, you can see how it grows through this chart. That's really nice. You can also put an alarm and see where things are peaking if you had RPM. So there's wonderful use for it, but we're not going to use it today. If you like it, set it up. If you don't, no problem. Up to you. So I'm going to right click here, and I've just right clicked in this box here, and I'm going to click on remove window. And so that's taken that window away. Now, one of you may say, well, hold on a second, I want that back. No problem. If you want that back, just click add window at the bottom and you choose the storyboard. And hey presto, it's back again. And so this is a customizable way of being able to set up this view. Now I'm going to get rid of that. I'm just going to right click here and I'm going to click on remove window because I want to be able to set up that view I showed you earlier on in that screen grab. So the next thing I want to be able to do here is I want to be able to go in and I want to find my GPS channels. Now, if anyone's used Race Studio 2 analysis and iRacing, you can all relate to this. When you've got too many channels in your actual setup, finding the channel you want takes ages. And I'm using iRacing as an example because you'll get 73 default channels from iRacing, and finding the one you want takes a while. As you can see here, I've got quite a few that are coming in on my system that is here. There's plenty that is there, and I've actually even created some math channels down here as well, which adds more. Now, the beauty of this is that you now have a search box to be able to find this. And so if I just type in here GPS, now I've got the GPS channels that are available to me. And if you remember, the one that we were going to use was GPS Longitudinal Acceleration, which was GPS Long ACC, which is nice. Now, one of the other things that you'll see advance as well as we go through, and this is consistent in every single AIM device, is that the GPS channels are always named the same, which means if you want to borrow and share profiles with other people, that's great if you're using GPS data, because you can take one of my profiles and apply it on yours and you'll see the same information. It's when we start getting into the complexity, especially with Race Studio 2, that I might call brake pressure BR press and you might call it BRK PRESS. And then it gets a bit weird. But here, the beauty of it is they're all called the same thing. So what we're going to do is we typed in GPS and I'm going to click here and I'm going to click on GPS Longitudinal Acceleration. Now, the first thing you're going to notice is that it's not in the same order that I had earlier on. I had speed at the top, then I had driver input in the middle, then I had time distance at the bottom. In Race Studio 2 analysis, you went in and you sorted the channels with a fancy little box up here. Never fear, you can still do it with Race Studio 3 analysis. I've actually asked for that feature, and I think Emilian answers the same. I know, you've told me 1,000 times, but at the same time, what you can do here is you can actually go into these buttons here, if you've ever used these, and these will determine how your charts look on your graph. So for example, if I did this one, which is overlapped, as you can imagine, these are overlapped on top of each other. And sometimes this is really, really useful. One of the areas that I absolutely love, and I don't know if any of you have been watching Formula One and seen the AWS insights, and they've started to share telemetry data. One of the things that I do love is where you see throttle position go down and then you see brake pressure pop up. And so an overlapped chart like that is a really nice way of being able to look at this on this particular area. But at the same time, we, in this instance, want them tiled on top of each other. Now you get the default tiling, or you can just specify the ones you want. So if I click over here and I say that I want to be able to mixed, this gives me the opportunity of being able to assign them how I want. You see this illuminates here, but the big thing you need to be looking for is these. Notice that this 1 and 2 has just popped up. This gives me the ability to tell Race Studio 3 Analysis which bar I want at the top and which one I want at the bottom. Because I've only got 2 here, but if there were 5, you could specify that way. So if I said, for example, GPS speed is 1, and longitudinal acceleration number 2. Now we're starting to get closer to that view that I was talking about earlier, which is absolutely fantastic. Now I can start to see what I was thinking about in terms of the view that we were thinking about. So this is fab. This is the view that I wanted to be able to see, and we're all good from that sort of respect that's there. Now, the one thing that's lovely is that the map box as to where you are on track is there by default. And that's brilliant, but you can size it if you want to, make it a little bit bigger, which I like to. And then if you wanted to, you could even zoom in here, which is fab, look at that, and just get closer to the data that you're looking for. So again, so nicely integrated and built into the interface that is there. So that's the view we want. Now, first things first, one of the challenges that we generally tend to have is if we don't save this and we open up the file again, we'll lose the view that we were looking at. And Race Studio 2 was no different. I'm sure many of us have gone, oh, I forgot to save that. That's annoying. So we want to be able to save this as a profile as well. So what we're going to do up here is we're going to click on this little gear icon that's here. And the beauty of this being recorded is you can go back and watch this time and time again. And we've already talked about some of these in previous webinars. So I'm going to click here and I'm going to click Save Profile As. I'm going to name it AIM Technologies Webinar. Right? Perfect. And I'm going to click on OK. And now we have that saved. And if you're ever wondering what the profile, if it shows up, all the tabs will have that now listed here, which is nice. So your session will have that profile listed here against the session and track your work. So now we've saved this. This is available for you to be able to use time and time again, depending on what you want. So the next thing we're going to do now is that we're going to start having a look at some analysis, and we want that time distance chart to be able to pop in. So I'm now going to click on laps, which is here, and I'm going to pick a lap which is distinctly different from the others so that we can see a variance. So if only the other drivers were all doing 114s and not 112s, I'd be really good at this track. So let's have a look here. We're going to click there, and I'm going to select the lap. Now this pops up from time to time. I think this is one of the quirks that needs to be built through on the system, not a huge issue necessarily to be able to work through, but at the same time, it may show up a couple of laps as you do that. So I'm actually going to turn that one off, and it sort of carries over the one that's from previous, but at the same time, it will pick the lap that you've listed there. So I've got that listed as the lap that I want to be able to compare. You can see that this was the slower of the 2 laps, and this is why the faster lap is here. It's a slightly different view than Race Studio 2 Analysis, but it basically shows where the red lap is faster, and then gets a bit slower and gets closer to the, and then is faster again in terms of areas. And we're going to look at what that means as we get into the data analysis. Now, one of the things you're probably noticing is you're like, well, hold on, those lines are very thin, and I'm not particularly a huge fan of those colors. Not a worry. We just pop in here, pick the colors we want. So we'll make that one blue, and we'll make this one nice and red. Now, that's made things just slightly easier to be able to see, especially when we get to the overlay here, the map, but hold on, they're not quite thick enough, and I want to be able to see those with a little bit more detail. So then I can also pop up here. I can click on this little, in the US they call it a wrench, here in the UK we call it a spanner, and we're going to click on the time distance, which is the chart that we're on. Time distance here matches time distance here, and I'm just going to play around, and I'm going to say, well, I want the lines at 2, and then yeah, that's great. And then the other thing I also want is I want to be able to see something, but we'll look at that in a second. So what you've seen there is I've now made those thicker, so they're easier to be able to see. And again, so that I don't forget to do this, just like if you were writing a document in a word processor or something like that, click on this, click on Save Profile, it will overwrite what you'd had before, and now your profile is updated with even more of your customized view as to what you're looking for. So now we're in a position where we can start using that sort of rationale that we were talking about in relation to what's happening on track. And so you can see that if the 1 minute 14 lap, which is here, and then you can see that the red lap is faster, we can start comparing why. So let's have a think about some of the other aspects that we want to be able to have a look at here and get into some of the details going forward. And so let's have a look at why is this red lap faster here? Well, I think if this is state number 1 here, then we can pop up here and say, well, why is that happening? Well, as we can see here, it's because the red lap is faster, but interestingly, not a huge amount of driver differences going on here. Now, I won't give you more than one guess to probably be able to figure out why that's happening. Feel free to write it in the comments box if you are curious and as to or interested in why you think that's happening. But there are ways of us being able to find that out later on. And we're going to have a look at that in a bit more detail. But arguably, in that sort of situation, we have a draft that is going on. Now, that's not necessarily the best example to be able to have a look at, but there is a nicer one here I want to be able to look at sector number 5. Why is it that all of a sudden the blue lap, the red lap goes from being, a little bit faster here and almost gets to the point where it slows down and meets the blue lap? And so faster, not as fast. And the reason being is you can see here that if I click on here, that the blue lap breaks a little bit later. You can see that here in relation to the red lap starts to slow before the blue lap. But one of the things you also notice is that that doesn't actually last and it moves out again. And the reason being is you can see that the red lap breaks sooner but carries more speed through the corner. So whatever it loses, it gains straight back because the blue lap is slower in this particular point. You might, well, okay, so you can see that the blue lap is here, it's slower and hasn't released the brake as soon as the red. So the time comes back. Like, fact, that's good to be able to have a look at, but where is that? And so that's the next fun part. So we've said, what's happening here? Why is it happening because of the miles per hour? We can see what's happening in terms of driver input, but the third component is where is that? And so if I put the mouse over the top of it, sure enough, we can actually see that it's in an area of the track called the tower corner or tower. This is quite an interesting corner because if you get it wrong, you meet a tire wall. And so it's also quite a nippy corner in terms of going through there at some significant speed as you approach. I mean, if you think about the approach speed that is here, we're talking 114, 113 miles an hour. So it's a fairly decent sized corner. You can see where that's actually happening on track. So now you've got the opportunity of being able to zoom in as to why that's happening and going forward. Now there's an even bigger example of where the red lap is sort of hovering in this instance of about 0.1 of a second faster. And then all of a sudden, something happens here and the red lap gets sizably faster than the blue lap that is here. And you can see, okay, well, we can see that's happened here. Let's have a look up here in terms of what's happening. And we can see, wow, look at that. The red lap carries the speed through the corner, whereas the blue lap might actually overslow the car by going a bit harder on the brakes and then is so inconsistent coming back out that taking the speed off and not carrying it through. So again, a great way of being able to see. Plus, in this instance, where can we see this? Well, this happens to be in the approach coming through a corner called Bobby's. And so again, not a huge, I mean, I'm wondering what's happening there. And this is where we may get into the video later on in the last 10 minutes, because there might have been something going on there that may not necessarily be driver related in respect to the fact that the line is pretty good. And so I wonder, oh yeah, interestingly, if something happened here, oh look, the red lap carries a lot more speed through the corner and the blue lap didn't. And so the question is why? That's where we start looking at a little bit of video to be able to round it off. Now you might be saying, well, that box there is too small for me to be able to see exactly what's happening on screen. So never fear, that's not a problem. What we're going to do next is we are going to move to the next part, which is we're going to click on this button here, show the track layout. So this is the view you're going to get. And the question is how much you want to be able to see on here. Again, as a default view, it comes with the storyboard, not for me. So I'm going to remove that window. A nice big view that is there. I can see the channels. I don't need these channels that are here. In fact, if I hit the space bar, that will disappear and I'll just get a nice view of the entire thing. Now the space bar is probably one of the most aha moments with Ray Studio 2 analysis and a little bit of Ray Studio 3 analysis I've had in every single instance over the last 10 years of showing people how to use the software. And it just gives you so much more space on the screen to be able to work through. Now, the reason that this is nice is that you get a much better view of the whole lap. You can zoom in a better particular spot, but there's a few other things you can also work through here. If you quite fancy, I'm a bit of a Microsoft fan, not a Google fan, and I'm not necessarily over the moon about using Google Earth. I quite fancy using Bing. You're like, all right, no problem. Let's switch that to using the Bing map instead to be able to give you a slightly different view. Now, I'm talking about loyalty towards a particular brand there. Where I sit in this conversation is more along the lines of which one of these mapping softwares gives me a better accuracy in relation to line, because I'm sure we've all experienced it. The line has been slightly askew with the GPS signals overlaid on some of the Google Earth or the Bing Maps. And that's just by default of how that's sort of all lining up with the mapping softwares and stuff like that. Some of them are better than others. Some might be more frequent than others. And so as a result, I actually quite like this Bing view, to be honest, because you can see that there is a really nice sort of accuracy in terms of corner that is here. You can also see that there's a real difference in variances going on here. So I have a suspicion as we go through that there may be some element of racing going on here, and there may be another car in front of the other car. Again, previously, that would have been hard to be able to do, and you would have to go to your GoPro file and you would have to go through and go, hold on a second, which lap was that? 1, 2, 3, 4. That's lap 4. Okay, on lap 4, was there any in front of me? Not necessarily the case. And we're going to get there later as we go through this presentation, because it speeds up our way of being able to identify is it something we were doing as a driver, or is it something that we were doing in relation to racing. And I'm hoping this was racing, because I remember this race being an absolute blast and had a brilliant time this weekend, which is indicative of, I think, nearly any Formula Ford race that anyone's ever been in. So, not that I'm biased towards that at all. So what we're going to do is we're going to leave this here. But again, we don't want to lose what we've just set up. So again, let's not forget to pop up here, click Save Profile. Now that's the profile I've set for this particular file that we've got here. The final thing we want to be able to do for today's demonstration is we want to set up the time distance view as well. And then, time distance. We've already done that. Ignore me. What we want to set up is the split times report, because the split times report is one of my favorites for 2 reasons. It's a huge confidence booster. One of the reasons that I think we always get frustrated, and as racers or engineers of races, have you ever come back to the paddock and the conversation, and the driver's like, I could have been so much faster. Well, let's find out if you could have been. And being able to break the track down in terms of saying, I didn't get turn 2 right that time round, or I want to be able to see my consistency, it helps for not only being able to say you are faster if you put it together, but also you're desperately inconsistent at this part of the track and you're beautifully consistent here. So ignore that bit, just carry on doing what you're doing and put all your focus and attention on this particular zone of the track. So what we're going to do is we're going to hover across here until we click on this button here called Show Split Times Report. And if I click on that, I'm going to get this view that shows me the laps by the segments that are created. Now, one of the things that you may be thinking is, I've got a lot more segments than that in my setup. And that's because when you load your files in Ray Studio 3 Analysis, it will by default break them into a track map, which is green means straight, blue means left. Sorry, I'm thinking as to which one means which, and red means right. And so every time the track turns right, it will create a segment, and that's your right-hand turn. Every time the track goes left, it will create a segment that's your left-hand turn. Every time the track is in a straight line, that's your straight. And so it's going to break it up. Now, what I've done is I've actually created my own segments. And to be able to do that, what I've done is I'm going to go back to the time distance report. And you can see that these all represent different parts on the track. If I hit the space bar, I'm going to get back my map here. And you can see where I've created this. This break here is just before we start breaking down for what is called the quarry corner. This crest, it seems like miles from the corner. But what's actually happening here is there is a crest and it bumps and gets ugly and you're doing 125 miles an hour, so you don't want to mess it up. But in many respects, I've created this segment number 2 in this particular area, and you create your segments however you choose. Now, one of the things we always recommend is make your splits on a straight so you don't get any weird anomalies in terms of where the break point was. And if you broke just a hair's breadth sooner on one lap, it might completely skew your segment analysis. And we'll break that down into more. We'll probably do more of a detailed view of split time reports. And we actually did one in the last webinar, but it's something that we want to focus on more. If you want to change your segments, you've got lots of options. So if I want segment 1 to be a little bit smaller, I can drag it by holding it here and move it like that. If I want to be able to create a new segment inside of segment 1, I can right click in it and I can divide the split and I can start moving this around if I need to. If I want to be able to right click in this and then merge with the next split, I can create that size. And what we'll do is create a map that works for you in terms of the segments that work for you. For example, when I'm running an event called the Walter Hayes Trophy, I'll break it down into exactly the same segments that the Walter Hayes Trophy uses, which is 3 segments, just like a Formula One race. Not only do I think at that point I'm in a Formula One race, but at the same time, it means that when I look at the scoring reports come through TSL timing, I can see what other people are doing in relation to their sector times and mine, which just helps me with my sector analysis. But what I'm actually doing here is I'm just breaking this down into segments that works for me, that allows me to break it down in terms of different areas. So now I've selected the segments that I want here. The next thing I need to do is go back to that split times report, because this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and in the future, you'll be able to right click in these and you'll be able to rename them and be able to say this one is, I don't know, Avon Rise, which is effectively sort of part of what that straight's called. And you can see that there. And as you go to the split times report, it will show up there. Now there's a slight sort of bug. And remember, this is a beta. So don't worry about sort of the bugs, just report them up here with this nice little green helmet and send it through to AIM. And that will be sort of adjusted for you. That when you save this and come back to it, it makes it back to segment number 1. Now I'm sure that's hopefully an easy fix, but at the same time, it just makes this segment analysis even easier. For example, I could make this one called Quarry, and we'll probably dig into each of these in a little bit more detail. So here we'll just call this one Quarry. In terms of the corners we're looking at. Now, if I go back to the split times report, which is here, did I click on that? I did. You can see that now I'm going to move this over. So I've got this. Now we've got these segments here that I can start analyzing the performance in each of those particular areas. It's lovely that I've sent this feedback to Emiliano through this little green helpful icon here. And I think Emiliano just commented in the comments box. I'm pretty confident this will be okay in the next beta, which is lovely to be able to see. So this is feedback in action. And remember, this is a beta, so don't all sort of worry that things aren't 100% perfect. Race Studio 2 analysis is for that if you need that absolute confidence. Race Studio 3 is for when you've got enough time to start getting used to the software. And to be honest, I used a lot of this at the track now, but the feedback is what's so important to the folks at AIM. So what I've also got here is I've got the option of being able to start working through some of my laps. And you can see that I've got a lot of options that are available to me. The segments that I just created down here represent the segments that I have here. Here's the straight and here's the straight. I also have the option now with this extra bar on the side to be able to look at my consistency through that particular segment. I love that. As Roger Cadell taught me once upon a time that the further apart the segments are when you analyze multiple laps, that's called noise. And noisy laps are inconsistent. The closer the laps are together, the more consistent they are. And now what you can do in your segment is you can just see how well you did as you went through that segment. And the further apart they are, the noisier the segment, the more inconsistent you are in that particular area. So that's one way of being able to look at it there. You've also got another lot of useful features down here where you've got, the average value for that segment, the theoretical segment area in terms of your best for the theoretical lap, and so forth. So you've got a lot of great information that is there. But there's one feature which has been created for consistency analysis, which I absolutely adore because I'm a visual person. I love being able to see colors. And so if I click here, it says click to colorize the splits according to how according to the split times. If I press that, I now have the consistency or lack of consistency created in a lovely colorful diagram that shows me where I need to focus as a segment on the track and where I'm doing okay. For example, segment 7 and 8, this one and this one, so coming through Bobby's, and this has got a name which I can never remember what it is, even to this day, and then coming through camp, a lot of green here. This is a weird lap. Who knows what was happening here, but this is okay, pretty consistent. Now, if everyone else is doing 6 seconds through there, you need to figure it out, but consistency is okay. But at the same time, what is going on here? What is going on here through Quarry? Look, there's a lot of red and colors. Immediately, if I'm doing personal analysis of my performance on track, why am I good in some instances and so poor in others, and being able to really drill into why that's happening and what's happening. Something that's really important as you look through this particular variable as well. So I love that visualization, and I think that it's a way of being able to be consistent. And I'll give you an example. If I click on this segment, if you notice, with the exception of the anomaly laps, which interestingly, if I wanted a little bit of sort of like, let's just take that off. I'm not, I'm way better than that. So let's take that other one here. They were just weird laps. Look how much closer these laps are here. And that's where we're consistent, or we can see consistent in colors. But if I clicked on this one, Quarry, we can see that they're sort of more inconsistent. In fact, that's interesting. Sort of analyzing in real time. And so, not quite there. That's probably indicative of the fact there's a lot of speed going through there, but there's a lot of split in terms of scatter that's here. Again, we can get into analysis for a lot of time, a lot of personal preference to be able to go through there. But I do love this color representation. Now, there's one other thing we also want to have a look at here. And I got asked this question on YouTube, I think it was the other day, or someone sent me an email going, I can't find my theoretical best lap anymore. Well, to be able to do that, you need to be able to change the metrics and the units, which are, instead of being, took 10 seconds, this took 12 seconds, we do it in cumulative, which says if you add sector 1 to sector 2, sector 3 to sector 1 and 2, and so forth, as you go through, you get your full lap time here. If I click here, now you can see what the representative, if you could mute, if you're watching, that would be fab. Thank you. We can see that what we've got is, by the time we get to the end of the segment, these are the lap times. It also gives us the opportunity of being, sorry about that, Paul. It also gives us the opportunity of being able to see what our lap times were for each of the laps, and what our theoretical lap would be, what our, probably the worst lap would be, and what our best rolling lap was. And so it gives us a great view. So again, last thing we want to do is pop up here and click on Save Profile. Where are we? Now, that's your view. Now, remember I said those are your 3 screens. I would argue, and the beauty of this is that we all probably do this, have fun, enjoy analyzing our data. Some would say, no, you need different stuff, you need everything else. For me, if I were teaching and if I was showing somebody and I was saying, here are the 3 things that you would need, these 3 tabs in Race Studio 3 Analysis will get you through nearly every single question you will probably have to be able to analyze your data at any given time. Being able to measure this aspect of, why am I slower, or where am I slower or faster? Why is that happening because of speed? What am I doing as a driver, and where exactly is that on track? Fantastic. Being able to see this in more detail by being able to zoom in different areas, love this as well. Plus, I'm just curious about everything that's going on here. I'm sure one day a driver will meet those solar panels if they haven't already. It's one of those things where it's just a curiosity. And then the split times report. And those are your 3 key components using GPS data that any driver, any car, any professional, from professional all the way through to amateur, will give you everything that you need to be able to find improvement in your driving. So those are the 3. And that's what I'll start off with. Now, there was one thing that I said, if we had time at the end, which funny enough we do, and it's almost as if I planned it, was to be able to have a look at one last component that we want to be able to have a look at, which is what happens if we wanted to be able to add in a little bit of video as well. Now, in many instances, one of the things that we want to be able to do here is I still have a slight bug with my system. And again, very honest on these sort of things. The beauty of working with AIM is they're like, let us figure out how to work this out. It's part of the development with AIM, and we share files and all sorts of stuff. And so again, I'm going to say that this is a bug. It may not happen with yours. If it does, it's something that's being addressed. Is that in some instances, you may have seen, I'm going to close this, is that some people are lucky enough, this wasn't one of my files, this is somebody with another file. Notice how these two are combined together. You've got a data file and a video file that have sort of linked together. My system, for some reason, isn't linking the files, and we're trying to find out why, but that doesn't matter. The reason it doesn't matter is because I wanted to be able to demonstrate that even if you just have a SmartyCam HD with a GPS, I think you call them antennas, although I think of antennas in sort of 1980s cars that would pull up, but a GPS sort of receiver, whatever you call it, you can gather enough information to be useful in your analysis with the video files. And if you've got extra stuff being sent to the SmartyCam, you can use that too. But I'm going to show you that in a bit more detail. So I'm going to go back to that race that I did. And if I remember rightly, we were looking at this. And so we may be able to see if there were cars in the way. If there were cars in the way, as if everyone's in my way. There were cars I was racing with and they were faster than me. Let's put it into reality, and they're in my way because I can't get past them. That if I open up this file, one of the things you're going to see is this is sort of like a default view that I get. And again, one of the things that you're also going to notice is that I've gone back to a default view. I've got my lovely storyboard back. It's brought in RPMs. Again, I don't know how I set this up. It's something that I probably did. But at the same time, I've got a lot of profiles set up. In the essence of time, so we only have a few minutes left, I'm going to show you how to load a profile, which I set up earlier on, which helps us be able to work through this information that's here. So I'm going to load a profile. And one of the things you'll notice is that this is the one we set up today. Now, this won't work fully on this because this is a video file. It would do, but because we've got GPS data here, but I'm going to scroll down. No idea what I set up with that test. That was probably the last time we did something together. And I'm going to click on here, which is 404 driver, video GPS only. So hold on a second. So here we are. So this is the view that we had earlier on, and this is what we're talking about again. We've got GPS speed, we've got longitudinal acceleration, but we've also got this handy little box that's popped here with a video. If I click up here into laps, and I pick on, let's pick on, another lap that's here. I've now got two laps where I can see what's happening, and now I can start to compare the information and the data. But remember, I've now got extra information. I've got video information. And so one of the things that we absolutely love to be able to look at is, okay, so let's go back to this area here, which, is a case where, let's change these colors. I like this. We're going to do a bit of red, blue here. We're going to make this best one a red one, which is great. And you can see here, we've got this dip. This is actually the same file we used earlier, which is lovely because spookily enough, we picked the same laps, which is there. So as the thing here, we can see what's happened in this area coming into a corner called Bobby's. Let's zoom in and have a look. That the red lap is distinctly faster through there by 2 or 3 tenths than the red lap is faster than the blue lap. So we can see that because this has happened in terms of the red lap has gained some time. We can see that here because the red lap is faster through there. We can also see that because the blue lap holds onto the brakes, but we can also see that coming out the corner, the red lap has a slight bobble here, which is probably, I would argue, running out of road, which I'm glad that the steward of the course didn't see this because I might have had that lap deleted. But anyway, let's just ignore that one. And so what we can do is we can actually click and hover over here. And if we click on that, we can watch what happens going through that particular corner. And so the blue lap here and the red lap, do I run out of road? Well, almost. But it gives you an idea that all of a sudden the accuracy that we had in relation to the data we've seen here can be corroborated. Is that the right word? Corroborated? Can be validated by the video that is here. And we can start matching it together and start to really apply different types of analysis based on what's going on. Here, for example, let's have a look here. The red lap carries more speed through quarry, and we can see the red lap goes from being slower to faster, which is great. you can see that the blue lap carries the brake a little bit longer. And as a result, the red lap goes from being slower to being faster because it carries more speed through that corner. So let's have another little look here and see what happens. Is there anything that happens on the red lap? Yep, I get too close to this car. Clearly in my way. I'm obviously so much faster because if Steve's watching this, by the way, or Wayne, I didn't say that at all, because you can clearly see they're ahead of me, so they're doing something that I'm not doing well. But at the same time, you've got an idea now of the fact that the video adds certain information that you probably would never have had before, and it just adds this nice combination. But the video that is here, and this is why I love the fact that one of the most popular combinations that we're seeing when I chat to the AIM folks is a SmartyCam and a Solo 2 DL. Which, unless you've got a really fancy ECU stream, you're not getting a huge amount of car data from, but you are still getting all that wonderful GPS data, and you're also getting that SmartyCam feed. And add those two together, all I'm looking at here is GPS data and video. But if I showed this to friends of mine who are professional drivers all the way through to people like me, looking at it together, there's nothing that's on here that a driver would say, I can't find anything from that because that's insufficient data. Instead, they probably go, that's great, I can do a ton with that. And so there you go. So with that, those are your views to be able to think about. And I just want to be able to sort of reiterate. And just to give you a demonstration of what we've been talking about today, I'm actually going to close this one down. I'm going to go into that same file that I was looking at, which is data. Remember, these are data. And I'm going to click on here, and I'm going to load the profile, which was for our webinar. And hey presto, it's where we left it off with all the data, except for the one thing. No, Emiliano's on here. It changed the colors. But apart from that, it's fantastic. It just takes you back to where you were. And these are the three screens. If you set this up, and anyone who wants this, send me an email. I will send you this profile, time, distance, track, split times. Those three, all good. And everything is good. And so there you go. With time at 7 o'clock, we can, I think questions have been answered all the way through it. If you want to hang on for a bit, we can maybe answer a couple more questions. But with that, I'll say the end of the presentation today, and thank you all for being here. If you hang around for a few more minutes, great, but I know it's also dinner time in the UK, so I'm sure many of you have to be able to run. So thank you all so much for being here today. What have we got? Any questions? No, fab. Folks are starting to leave, which is great. All welcome. Again, also thank you. Very grateful for you to say that. I'm pleased that it's useful. This will be on YouTube, I think, and I'm sure that James from AIM Technologies, who's been on, I think, through the conversation, will be usually a day or two afterwards. It'll be available on YouTube for you to be able to watch. Thanks to everyone. We'll stay on. I stay on until 5 past at least to be able to answer any questions. But thank you.
James.
Yes.
Can I ask a question? It's Keith here.
Hello.
Hello. I've dropped my mic. Just dropped the thing. When you were going through the data, how do you play so that you can actually play the laps that you've highlighted? Because I couldn't find how to play it on the. Or do you have to move the bar across? So can you play? Like in the other version, you can actually play like a real-time lap. And you can overlay so you can see the 2 dots going round. Yeah, I just wondered how you do that in the new version, if there is such a way.
Yeah, it's the animation of the lap, even if you don't have the video, is what I'm thinking. Is that right?
Yes, that's it. That's it.
Yeah. You know what? So happy Emiliano's still on, because he might know the answer to that question. Emiliano, I don't know if you're still on. If you're not, we'll get that answered for you.
Okay.
I'm on here.
Ah, great.
Okay. At the moment, the animation is only available when you have a video. You can play the video. The animation on the with the only data stream is on the way. At the moment, it's not available.
Okay, that's it. That saves me hours of looking for a play button.
Okay, sorry about that, but it's not available now.
That's great. That's great. Also, I'm trying to import. I'm importing loads of things. My daughter races karts, and we race at one track. at Lid at the moment in Kent, and I've got loads and loads of data, but for some reason the Lid ones aren't loading. I've got like Rye House and Sittingbourne as well, and they've loaded up, but for some reason those ones aren't. Is there a way I can store the data and then import it from a file rather than import it from the older software? Do you see what I mean?
If you want to move the data from from the older software to from the RayStudio 2 analysis to the RayStudio 3, the only way is to import is to click the import button in the RayStudio 3,
okay. Well,
and select the folder in which you keep the data into RayStudio 2 analysis, and let the RayStudio 3 do the job for you. It will import all your folder if you select one.
Okay. Yeah, it's actually going through and trying and doing them again actually. So hopefully that will work. But thank you. And I'm going to go and look. I didn't realise you did other videos, so this only popped up on my email earlier on. So it's one of those things where I was getting really frustrated because the software is really good, but it's quite technical. So this has helped me a lot, and thank you for this.
No problem, Keith. Happy to have helped. I've also put a message to you with my email address.
Yeah, I did speak to you a little while back, and you sent me over some things and said to me to look at your channel on YouTube.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
of course. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I'm going to write your email address down, and then if I get any problems, is it all right if I give you any? I won't bore you, but if I could.
Of course. Yeah, no problem at all. And that's a message to everyone. It's sort of like if you want to send me an email or video, no problem at all. Happy to help out if I can.
Okay, many thanks. Many thanks.
Great. All right. A few more minutes for questions. Otherwise, I think we close this one down and wait for the next one, which will be interesting to see the feedback of what topics folks want to talk about next.
Hi there. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yep. Hi, Miles.
Hiya. I'm relatively a little bit new to this, but the situation that I'm in is we've got an MXL dash and a Radical, which I believe is only supported with RayStudio 2. We've recently gone to a newer Smarty Cam that's the latest unit with with the new GPS unit. So we're kind of a bit current new stuff, but a bit old stuff. Have you got a video that perhaps tries to do the same as what you've just done tonight, but for RayStudio 2?
So I don't have one of those. I know that James is on and others. I haven't done a video for sort of the combination of old and new, but it's interesting that it's not the first time I've heard of someone who's got like an MXL Pista and then they put a nice Smarty Cam HD, like a 2.1 or 2.2 or something on there as well. So something that may be worth looking at, but I don't have anything on that. It might be worth checking out the AIM Sports YouTube channel, because I have to say that they've done webinars now through all of the pandemic and lockdown, and I'm sure that there's probably something on there where someone may be able to help you out.
Right, okay. It just, having watched this and you're calling this the basics, to me that seemed very advanced. And I feel very lost even in just what you've gone through, because there was so much information to try and absorb. Another thing that I've found a little bit difficult, just maybe as feedback, is where your pop-up screen is in my screen. A lot of the time I think you're hovering your mouse to do something where it's hidden by yourself. So I'm thinking, how's he done that? And it's because it's underneath the screen where I can't see it. I don't know, it might be possible to somehow get yourself off the screen, my end, but I don't quite know how to do that either.
Got it. That's good feedback as well. We're experimenting with different types of webinar services to use, and if that's the case, then we want people to be able to follow the mouse. So last thing you want to see is my bald head, and probably more what you want to be able to see is what I'm doing. So that's good feedback for the next ones as well. Appreciate that. And if there's anything else that you do want help with, there's a ton of useful videos out there, but there's so many of them.
I know, that's what I have found. I have explored some on YouTube, but you could spend days watching them. So you need to hit jackpot and get the right one for what you need.
Yeah, agreed. And so drop me an email if you want. Happy to guide you into which videos potentially would help. That being said, though, the combination of old tech and new tech combined together, don't know yet. So that might be worth having a look at.
Okay, bro. Thanks so much.
No worries. You're welcome. All right, cool. So it's 7:10. I'm going to close this webinar now. Hopefully see all of you next time. And thanks again.